Okay, so today we're going to talk about Venn diagrams in relation to probability. And the beautiful thing about Venn diagrams is they give you a visual way to represent what's going on with probabilities. Okay, eventually we're going to also talk about something called two-way tables, which would be a great way to look at what's happening with probabilities, especially with multiple events occurring at the same time. But again, this probably is a little bit more visual. So let's talk about what happens with the Venn diagram. So the entire rectangle itself is representing the sample space. Okay, so all the events that could occur in a situation are going to be within this sample space. So let's just keep it really simple for this first example. Let's talk about the chances of it raining and not raining. Okay, if those were the two situations we were dealing with, then the chances of it raining would go inside this circle because that's like the only event in your sample space. And then therefore everything else would be the chances of not raining. And as we mentioned before, when you add up all the events in a sample space, they add up to be 1. Also, if you add up complements, they add up to be 1. So therefore, if I add up the chances of it raining and the chances of it not raining, all of that is going to add up to equal 1. Okay? So what does the rectangle represent? It represents the entire sample space. What does the circle represent? It represents a specific event. Okay, and what does the space outside of the circle represent? The complement. Okay, so like the not probability, something like that. Okay, so let's talk about a Venn diagram where there's two circles. Okay, so these two circles represent specific events. Okay, and in this situation, what these two separate circles are representing is that there's no overlap, so meaning they cannot be occurring at the same time, so that would be an example of disjoint events. Okay, now generally rain and snow are sometimes overlapping a little bit, but I'm just going to, for argument's sake, just keep it really simple. Let's say that the chances of it raining was one circle and the chances of it snowing were another circle. And again, realistically, I probably should be overlapping these because there are situations where it's raining and snowing at the same time. But just for argument's sake, let's say that they were separate, that they were disjoint. Everything that's now around these two circles would be the chances of it not raining and not snowing. Okay, so you would take the chances of it snowing, the chances of it raining, and the chances of it doing neither, and add all those together. And again, all three of those would have to add up to be 1 because everything within this rectangle, everything within this sample space has to add up to be 1. Okay, if you look at the third example, it says, are these two events disjoint? And the answer is no. Okay, there's some overlap. And the fact that there's no overlap means there's a way for both events to be occurring simultaneously, meaning at the same time. Okay, so the overlapping space, and again, we're going to talk about all of that. Let me give you a better example. And like I had said, maybe I should use rain and snow for this situation because sometimes it might just rain, right? Sometimes it might just snow, okay? Sometimes it might rain and snow at the same time. So again, you see that word and that we had talked about before. You can kind of ignore the whole multiply thing we had talked about. The Venn diagram is going to be a great way for you to be able to calculate an end probability regardless of independence and things like that. And then everything that's outside would be not rain and not snow. Okay, so that's actually probably the best way to represent what's happening with rain and snow. Okay, and again, if I add up the chances of it raining, the chances of it snowing, the chances of it doing both at the same time, or the chances of it doing neither, all 4 of those sections are going to total to come out to be 1. Okay, so therefore, everything in the sample space adds up to be 1. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one. We're just going to kind of basically, color in different sections in the Venn diagram to represent what's going on in each of these situations. It says an online bookstore offers a large selection of books. Some of these books are works of fiction, some of these are not. Some of them are available as ebooks, and some of those are not. Let F be the set of books that are fiction, and E be the set of books that are available as ebooks. So basically, I'm going to say this first circle is going to be E, this second circle is going to be F. The overlapping space in the middle would be E and F together. Okay, and on the outside, not E and not F. Okay, so it's saying color in books that are available as ebooks. Okay, so I can have books that are available as ebooks, and I can have them even if they're works of fiction. I don't care about if they're fiction or not fiction. I just want to know what are my ebooks. So I'm going to color in the whole circle. That is E. Okay, now if you look at the next one, it's saying books that are not works of fiction. Not works of fiction. Okay, so not works of fiction means so if I take the circle that is F, I'm going to color everything around that circle. Not inside the circle, but everything else. So that could be the stuff that's in E, but not in F. But actually that could be everything around this circle here that's outside of that circle F. Okay, so it could be in that space of not an E and not F. It could be in that space of E. It could be in that space of just no man's land. Everything that is not a work of fiction is everything around that. So if eventually I had to calculate that probability, I would add up all the probabilities of all the spaces around F. Books that are works of fiction, okay, and available as ebooks. Okay, so works of fiction and ebooks, that's going to be this space in the middle. Okay, that's E and F put together. Okay, both of them. Okay. Books that are works of fiction or available as ebooks. And this is going to be a tricky one, so we're going to have to be careful with this. Okay, these are not disjoint events, so that's why I can't just strictly add everything together. I'm going to have to be aware that there's some overlap. So I want a book that is a work of fiction or available as an ebook. So I want to add up everything that's a work of fiction plus everything that's an ebook all together. So things that are works of fiction are this entire circle right here. Okay, things that are ebooks is everything obviously in E, but I want to make sure I don't count that overlap twice. So I'm now just going to add up this additional space that's in E but not F. Okay, so the OR probability when events are not disjoint is as if I'm adding up these three sections together. And that's what makes something my OR probability. Everything in E plus everything in F, don't count the overlap twice. Okay. Books that are neither, books that are not ebooks and not works of fiction, that's basically everything that's on the outside. Okay, everything that's not in E and not in F. Books that are works of fiction and not available as ebooks. Works of fiction and not available as ebooks. Okay, works of fiction and not ebooks. So definitely works of fiction, I'm going to end up coloring what is F. But I can't have any of the fictional books also overlap with the ebooks, so actually it's just going to be this section right here. Okay, so again, the fact that it's specifically not ebooks, I can't count that middle space because that would have been something that would count as an ebook. Okay, so let's actually get into using the Venn diagram to do some sort of a calculation for a situation. Think again about the online bookstore that we were just doing in that previous exercise, and let's say that 62% of the books are works of fiction, 47% are available as ebooks, 14% are available as ebooks but not works of fiction, and a book will be selected at random. Let's create a Venn diagram to determine the probabilities. So this is a situation where I don't have disjoint events. I'm going to say the majority of the things we're going to work with are not going to be disjoint. So when you set up your Venn diagram, you want to make a circle, and you want to have another circle where they're overlapping. Okay, one of these circles represents ebooks, one of these circles represents fiction. That middle space is the overlapping E and F together, and everything around the circles is not E and not F. So remember I had said before how probability should always be between 0 and 1. I'm going to take these percentages and I'm going to write them as decimals when I write them in, because that way I won't make any mistakes when it goes to me actually calculating my probabilities. You really want to try to keep it as a decimal value. Okay, so it says 62% of my books are works of fiction. Now here's where this gets a little bit tricky. 62% is this whole circle right here. But I don't know what portion is supposed to go in the space that's just fiction and not ebook, and I don't know what portion is supposed to go in the space in the overlap, so I can't just put 0.62 down anywhere. I need to figure out like what's the space in the overlap before I can figure out how much of that is going to go so that these two things together totally add up to be 62. So I'm going to kind of put 62 on the side for just a second. Maybe I'll do this. I'll say the probability of a work of fiction is 0.62. Okay, so I'm going to have a similar situation when it comes to the ebooks one. 47% are ebooks, but again, I don't know what the breakdown is between what should be outside the overlap and what should be inside the overlap, so I can't really use that just yet because of the fact that I still need to figure out what goes in the overlapping space. But I do know that the probability of choosing an ebook is 0.47. Okay, last but not least, it's saying 14% are available as ebooks but are not works of fiction. So things that fall within E but not within F are right here. Now that I finally know this value, now I actually have enough information for me to be able to figure out how much goes in this outside space, how much goes in the overlap. That will help me to know what goes in the outside space for F, and then eventually I can make sure that everything inside the sample space adds up to be 1. Okay, so the whole E circle should add up to be 0.47. So if I do 0.47 minus 0.14, that's going to tell me that my overlapping space is going to be 0.33. Okay, so again, I did 0.47 minus 0.14, and that's how I figured out that middle space there. Now that I know that this middle space is 0.33, and I knew that fiction had to totally add up to be 62% or 0.62, I can do 0.62 minus 0.33, and when I subtract those from each other, that comes out to be 0.29. Okay, so now I know the breakdowns of what goes in the overlap, what goes outside of it, and then last but not least, remember that everything that's within this entire box has to add up to be 1, because all probabilities of all the events in a sample space have to add up to be 1. So if I add up these 3 probabilities and then I subtract them from 1, I can find out that that 0.24 goes in that outside space. Believe it or not, what we just did there by filling in all the values in the diagram, that's the hard part in these problems, okay? Once you figure out all those values, the remaining parts of the questions are going to be as simple as picking out a specific section of the Venn diagram or adding 2 parts together or something like that. Okay, so what's the probability that if I choose one book, so that's the idea, I'm choosing one book and I have to see if it fits certain characteristics. What is the probability that if I pick a book, that it's a work of fiction and it's available as an ebook? Yes, I know you see and, you might think multiply. Again, these are not necessarily independent events, so we're not going to do and like we were talking about yesterday. For now, I want you to think of and as the overlapping space. I want you to think of or as like these 3 sections of circles added together. And then we'll talk about other situations in just a second. Oops. So, what is the chance that something is a work of fiction, okay, and is also an ebook? Again, that's that middle space, so 0.33. Where in your mind you can think of 33%, but for now we should really be leaving our probabilities as decimals. What is the probability that the book is neither a work of fiction nor available as an ebook? So probability that it's not a work of fiction and it's not available as an ebook, that's this outside space right here. Everything that's outside of those 3 circles or these 2 circles added together, if you will. So therefore, that's going to come out to be 0.24. There's a 24% chance that I pick a book that's not an ebook and it's not a work of fiction. Okay, so like I said, all that setup, that's the most important thing. Maybe I'm going to add one additional one on here just because we've already done the setup for the calculations. Let's call this like 3 little i's together. What if you were being asked for P, the probability that something is an ebook or a work of fiction? So this is where you're going to have to be careful. If I want to do or, again, yesterday we had thought of or as and, right? Adding things together, but that was only when you have disjoint events, and clearly with the fact that there's overlap, these are not disjoint events. So the most important thing is that you don't, I'm going to put this down, don't count the overlap twice. Otherwise, you're inflating what the probability is supposed to come out to be. So basically, the way I like to think of doing these OR probabilities is I think of like 3 sections of circles. Everything that's in E but not in the overlap, plus everything that's in F that's not in the overlap, and you only count the overlap 1 time. When you add those 3 parts together, that's your OR probability. So therefore, it would be 0.14 plus 0.33 plus 0.29. Give me a second to add those together. Okay, so 14 plus 33 plus 29 comes out to be 76. And I do also want to point out, notice that if I take that 0.76 plus everything that was outside of that those 2 values are going to add up to be 1, because like I said, the sum of everything in the sample space should come out to be 1. Okay, so there's a 76% chance that if I pick a random book, it's available as an ebook or it's a work of fiction. So keep in mind, that means you're adding everything that's an ebook that's not a work of fiction, everything that's a work of fiction that's not an ebook, and everything that, overlaps between the two, E or F. Okay, let's do another example where we set up a Venn diagram and then answer some questions. It says when a fish is selected at random from a tank, the probability that it has a green tail is 0.64, the probability that it has red fins is 0.25, and the probability that it has both a green tail and red fins is 0.19. Okay, so as I mentioned before, very many of these situations are going to look like the way you set up your Venn diagram in the last problem, where it's two circles that are overlapping with each other. Again, you can tell there's going to be overlap because there are fish that have both green tails and red fins at the same time. Okay, they are not disjoint. So one of these is supposed to be representing green tails, one of these is supposed to be representing red fins. The middle section that overlap is the one that does both, and then everything that's outside those circles is everything that's not red fins and not green tails. Okay, so one of the things, as I said before, that you have a little bit of an issue with starting out is the fact that they give you that the green tails have to add up to 0.64, but again, that's the whole circle for G. And the problem is I don't know what part of 0.64 is supposed to go outside and in the middle of the overlap, so I'm going to need more information before I can fill out anything with that 0.64. So maybe the only thing I want to write down is that the chances of green is 0.64. Okay, the chances of a red fin is 0.25, and I once again have that same issue. I don't know the breakdown between what goes in the overlap and what goes outside of it, so I can't really do anything with that red just yet. But I do know from the last part, the probability that it has both a green tail and red fins is 0.19. That and, like I mentioned before, that is what you want to think of now as the overlap when you're dealing with a Venn diagram. So 0.19 is the part that where it has green tails and red fins at the same time, and then once I know that value, now I can start just subtracting from the given values. Like I knew this whole circle had to add up to be 0.64, so if I do 0.64 minus 0.19, I can figure out that everything that should be green but not having red fins would be 45% or 0.45. If I knew that the red had to be adding up to be 0.25, I can subtract 0.19 from it, and that gives me that the remaining space should be 0.06, so 6% of those fish have just red fins with no green tail. And then finally, I can add these three pieces together and subtract them from 1, and when I do that, that tells me that 30% of my fish have neither green tails nor red fins. Okay. Again, the bulk of the hard work is in what we just did, setting up the Venn diagram. Once you've set that up properly, it's a matter of choosing the right sections to either select or add together or whatever it happens to be. So it says, what is the probability that the fish has red fins and it does not have a green tail? Okay, so red fins but without a green tail is everything that's in this kind of like crescent shape type thing. Everything that's in the R circle but not in the overlap. And so if I add up everything that's obviously just in that red circle, not in the overlap, that comes out to be 0.06. Okay, so basically 6% of those fish come out to have red fins but no green tail. What is the probability that the fish has a green tail but not red fins? So probability of having a green tail but not having any red fins. So again, that's going to be a crescent moon type shape right here, where it's everything in the G circle that's not in the overlapping area. So that comes out to be 0.45. And last but not least, what is the probability that the fish has neither a green tail nor red fins? Okay, so that's the neither. Okay, neither green tail nor red fins. That's everything that's outside the circles, and that's why that one's going to come out to be 0.3. Okay, just to do one last one, just so that you're like aware of this when we get into some calculations. What if they asked you, so this will be like number 4, what's the probability of choosing a fish that has either green, tail, or red fins? If you were going to do that one, remember that the way that you would do this, let me erase this for a second, this is 0.3, is that you're going to be adding up for an OR probability. That means you're adding up everything that's in G that's not in the overlap, everything that's in R that's not in the overlap, and only overlap one time. That's the most important thing with these OR probabilities. Don't count the overlap twice. So when I add up 0.45 plus 0.19 plus 0.06, that together is going to come out to be 0.7. Again, if I got confused with that, maybe an alternative way, or if I didn't have a calculator and I want a quick way of adding that up, remember, this is going to be the complement to everything that's outside the circles. So if I saw that this is 0.3, if I do 1 minus 0.3, that's where I could also get 0.7 from as my OR probability. So biggest difference between yesterday and today, OR is these three portions of those yellow parts of the circle that I have highlighted, and is the part that's just in the overlap.